I'm Cicely Waters with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and it is truly great to be here in Louisville and back at the Mid-America Trucking Show. So thank you all for joining this Pro Talks session. We're pleased to have with us today representatives from the U.S. Department of Transportation and FMCSA who will join in a fireside chat to offer insight into topics of which we know you all are interested. Our first guest is Ben Siegrist. Ben rejoined the Department of Transportation in January of this year as the Director of Public Liaison and Senior Advisor in the Office of the Secretary. Ben previously served in the Secretary's office from 2017 to 2018. In his professional history, Ben has had stops leading policy, legislative and advocacy efforts for OOIDA, the American Truck Dealers, and the National Association of Manufacturers. Most recently, Ben was a senior policy professional at the U.S. House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, where he worked specifically on highways and surface transportation issues. He is joined today by Jesse Elison, who serves as FMCSA's Chief Counsel. And as you'll quickly learn today throughout their conversation, Jesse is no stranger to the trucking industry. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ben Siegrist and Jesse Elison.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? I think this thing's on. Not to worry, Jesse and I are here from the government, and we're here to help. Thank you, Cicely, for that broad and robust introduction of both of us. We are certainly happy to be here. This, for me personally, is, I think, the fourth Mid-America Truck Show that I've been able to attend. As she mentioned, I've had stops over the last couple of decades with OOIDA. I think I see some OOIDA friends in the audience today, all the way back there. Hey, guys. As well as the American Truck Dealers and then the National Association of Manufacturers, where we did have all the trucking OEMs and a variety of other folks from the sector. My role here at DOT now, or not here, but my role at DOT is really to do the outreach with the business community and industry actors. So while that is comprehensive to all the different modes and sectors at the department, I have this deep personal connection and history with surface transportation and trucking specifically. So it is something that I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be back at MATS and talking to Jesse a little bit more about the specific things we're looking at in the FMCSA world, which is a good segue, actually, Jesse. Maybe you could let the audience here know your background and what you bring to the table and to the job.
Well, it's fun to be here at MATS. This is the first time I am attending. I've heard about it for years and years. Folks from operations would always, I know when they would be planning to go to this in March and April, I'd hear about it all the time. My professional background really starts with an LTL carrier in Montana. Some of you may remember Watkins and Shepard Trucking. Great company, and I had a great introduction to the industry working with them. They were primarily a furniture hauler, and the cool thing about Watkins and Shepard for me was living in Montana, but they had distribution centers throughout the United States, and so it was really a great exposure just to the entire land that covers all 50 states. But from there, I've actually worked with a bulk tank carrier. I've worked with some flatbed carriers. I've been in private practice a couple of different times. Primarily, I've worked on the business side, but with a lot of freight issues and freight disputes, with somewhat minimal exposure to accident litigation. But I'll tell you, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to serve the industry and join FMCSA. I know it's an honor to be part of the Trump administration, and I can assure you the leadership is very strong. Secretary Duffy and his team, they're solid. And from my short time at the FMCSA, I can also echo what probably many of you already know. There's a lot of incredible professionals at FMCSA and very strong leadership, and so I'm very excited to be able to jump in and to work with them.
Well, you mentioned, yes, we are both, well, for me, it's back at the department, but at the department here as part of the second Trump administration, Trump 47. You mentioned Secretary Duffy, who has been out there about a lot of the priorities that he wants to see that we're going to be active and activated on across the department, but maybe at least we could highlight some of the areas of focus specific for FMCSA. Just fully noting we're, 9-10 weeks into this at this point, so there's going to be a lot on the plate. Hope that we're able to cover some of it today, but understand this is certainly going to be a process as we look at where we can move forward. But generally speaking, the areas of focus.
I'd like to highlight a few areas. It is still very early. So Secretary Duffy, we're still setting our priorities. There's probably a number of topics that we're looking at that we don't have clearly formulated. So I'll pass over probably a couple of the topics that you're really interested in. But I hope to talk about a few of the topics that you're also interested in as well. The biggest news for us this past week was the White House's nomination of the administrator, Derek Barrs, which I think probably many of you know. My short time here this morning, a couple of people have already mentioned him, and we're excited to get him on board with his background and to get his input on the priorities of the administration. But a few of the big topic areas that I can talk to directly is one is enforcement. There's a lot of emphasis on ensuring due process to make sure that our already well-trained and highly professional workforce at FMCSA has a renewed focus on due process and has a renewed focus on making sure that their inspections and investigations are done fairly, that they're transparent, that they're evidence-based. And we want to also make sure that this is an emphasis with our critical state partners and that it's consistent throughout jurisdictions. There's a memorandum that's available on the DOT's website that outlines this, so it's all in the open, and it's very aggressive. I'd highlight that one of the principles that are included in this is in a criminal context, which we're not involved in. There's a Brady rule where you have to, from the government, you have to provide any exculpatory evidence, anything that would show that the person being investigated is not at fault or would mitigate whatever the investigation and charge might be. That's part of our new guidance, even in a civil context. So the emphasis on being fair and being clear and communicating with the population that we're overseeing and governing is really important to the new administration, and Secretary Duffy as well in his Office of General Counsel.
I think you've hit on a few things there, right? In terms of enforcement, the fairness is important, the communication is important, the ability for people in the industry to understand what it is that the agency is doing, that the department is doing in terms of really, I don't want to call it a culture change, right? But a shift and a focus.
I don't think it's a cultural change. Yeah, we've got great people, and across our jurisdictions and our offices for sure. But it is a renewed emphasis, and it will require a lot of training and attention. And that, in large part, that'll be a measure on how well I do my job. So if things haven't improved there, then I think you'll be able to say that I didn't do my job.
And I will happily point to you and direct people to you for that.
But I'll mention a couple of other things, but while I won't specifically have anything to share about Secretary Duffy's priorities, I do know he has an interest in the FMCSA, and that is a really good thing. that he knows us and he has an interest and he appreciates truckers. He has a background. He had a CDL. So he knows the challenges that our industry faces. He knows how important it is to focus on safety. That would be one of the other items that isn't new and isn't renewed, but won't change and will gain a lot of attention. One of the things about safety that I know is important to the new secretary or the secretary's office is efficiency, is building in efficiencies to improve safety. You see that in the news with the FAA. I know it's it's kind of baptism by fire with Secretary Duffy coming in when he did, and how much attention is being put on the FAA. But the efficiencies that can improve safety are definitely a priority. Innovation is also a priority. I know that's often used as a slogan word, but we see it every day too in our industry. All of the layers of technology stacks and all of the telematics that you, regardless of the size of your company, really has to use to survive. And I can tell you from my professional background, the amount of kind of data and various parties that involves it adds layers of complexity to your business. And sometimes lawyers add to that complexity as well, even though I would like to think you need lawyers to help navigate it sometimes, but I'll fully concede that sometimes they just make things worse.
I might move my chair back a little bit as you...
But so innovation is definitely one of the big areas that we're looking at as well. But also one of the areas working closely with our partners. And I think the FMCSA has a really great history listening to stakeholders across the board, small, medium, and large. And we're going to continue to do that. And Ben talked about his personal role, but we look at truckers and the companies as really important partners in fulfilling our mission of safety, And so we're going to amplify that as well.
So, you talk about safety, you talk about enforcement, and frankly, acknowledging the role that I have and the team that we have at the department specifically. I can't harp on this enough that truly, as these issues are being discussed, as potential regulation is being developed, it is a core function and a goal that I and my office is truly dedicated to ensuring we do this as much hand in glove communication as we can, frankly, with the people that are here at the truck show and with the people in this room. We want to be open, we want to be transparent. I think perhaps there have been authors of prior regulation that affects your industry that have looked at it as, well, it works on this whiteboard, that means it must work on the road. That is not the approach we're taking here. We want to make sure not only that we are able to communicate to you how these things are being developed and when they're in development, but that we actually understand what it means on the workplace, in the workplace and on the road where it's going to be activated and utilized. And in reference to some of those regulations, maybe not getting into the specifics, but Jesse, if you could give a little bit of look into how Trump 47, how the administration wants to approach the regulatory structure. Really, frankly, I think a lot of people in this room would argue the over-regulation of the trucking industry.
And just to echo, your comments, you are heard. It's really important to appreciate the agency is hearing you. It might not be as fast as you think, but your feedback is critical. So when it comes to regulation, we are definitely entering into a deregulatory environment. If you remember Trump 1.0, it was 2-1, and now it's 10-1. And so we're...
Expand on that. 10-1.
So, yeah, you got to get rid of 10 rules for every rule you add. That's pretty aggressive. And
let me back that up by saying also, if there are rules on the books you think we ought to get rid of, we're going to be looking for those. Please don't hesitate to let us know. We'll take all comers on that list. So, Yes, sir. I'll tell you what, we'll catch up after this.
So,
Yes, sir. We can find you after this and we'll figure it out.
no, you're highlighting such an important, and everybody experiences it, even mid-sized large companies, this disconnect between innovation and just like a human touch. And a lot of it is resources.
Yes, sir. And we appreciate it, but there's about 150 people in the room. We want to make sure we can get through some of this stuff.
But we do, but it's an important point for sure. But so when we're in a deregulatory environment.
There we go.
Keep that in mind, that yeah, we absolutely are going to be very aggressive about and attentive to the doesn't mean we're not going to pass regulations, but it does mean that it's going to be a very common sense, evidence-based approach, and that's a specific reference that you'll often see in some of the executive orders, and that's the approach that we're going to be taking at the FMCSA. And so the regulatory process from where I sit, and for the past couple of months, it's been incredibly enlightening to me, from going from a practicing attorney to seeing how these rules are made. And I can assure you that there's a lot of thought and very smart people that are part of that process, and looking to the public to contribute and taking what you say in the comments very seriously. And so your feedback does matter, and it's being heard. It doesn't happen as fast, and there's limited resources. And one of the points that I definitely want to emphasize when it comes to regulation is that FMCSA is regulating within their authorities. And because we oversee such a vibrant, large population, there's with valid incentives that are often at odds with other parties, there's often asked a lot of the FMCSA, and that's okay. But what the FMCSA can do, especially in a regulatory context, is under the 10-to-1 as well, but even is they have to operate within their authorities. And most of their authority has to do with safety. There's a lot of regulations that have to do with safety, and then there's a little bit that has to do with commerce as well. But any regulation will be within their authorities. And so that's often a parsing out exercise, but it's a critical one, because we're not going to do something outside of our authority, and that just invites a lot of lawyers to jump in and create a lot of litigation for years and years, and exhaust resources that we just don't have, to do. And not to sell my lawyers under the,
You can throw them.
But we don't want that. We don't want that.
You mentioned something there, Jesse, which is kind of this balance between safety and ensuring that the role that we know that trucking and truckers play in the larger supply chain, how we've seen this, or general public at least has seen this more over the last 5 years maybe than they had previously, in terms of the response that the industry here was able to provide or was asked to provide. And during the pandemic, throughout, looking at other supply chain challenges that have arisen. So how do we complement ensuring safe, smart regulation that's focused on safety, but that also affords these folks the ability to contribute, to be the economic drivers that we know that they are?
Yeah, well, we can't compromise safety. We can't do anything that compromises safety. But it's a really important relationship that exists every day. You make it work every day to drive safely and still be profitable. I thought, there were a number of things. There's so many things that out of the pandemic. One of the really positive things was, I think, a positive view on our industry because of truckers, because you kept things going. And we're still benefiting, and hopefully we can continue to benefit from it. And I know that President Trump and Secretary Duffy like truckers.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. So I think this is we're still very early, but I think we'll see some really positive things come from the fact that they know our industry, you know.
Well,
and
and
that they,
to your point, I think Secretary Duffy was the first secretary who ever actually had a CDL. He had it for about 30 years. Which is just really cool. As far as the relationship with the supply chain, there's this very common sense, I think, we all just intuit that the safer you run, the better you're going to be able to make a living. And so the rules that are in place and the initiatives if you attended, or I think there's on Saturday morning, there's a couple of or one panel. Is there a couple panels or one panel? Breakfast this morning, then I know there's one.
But one of them covers the drug and alcohol clearinghouse, and those kinds of tools are critical to keeping drivers qualified. And they need to be modernized, they need to be up to date, they need to be accurate. And so, you know, for my short tenure in the industry, I remember when they started to talk about crash preventability determinations and data queues. And I haven't been around that long, but just to see the progress on those fronts, I think, is really significant. And the fact that FMCSA is continuing to use those tools to better ensure that we're evaluating drivers and confirming that the drivers are qualified. But so I think there's just an obvious connection. It's an obvious connection between ensuring that drivers are safe and that we're moving freight down the roads. And
you mentioned a couple of tools that FMCSA is advancing and even referenced some of the other panels going on here. I think it's, maybe we could talk just briefly a little bit more. As mentioned, we had a team of our folks at one of the breakfasts this morning talking about a new ID verification process that's beginning to roll out and will develop a little bit more throughout the year, but maybe if you could highlight some of that and what it means.
It's really cool to be here during that process for me. Like you, I've heard about these things on the outside for years, and to see what Pavan and the IT team have done at FMCSA is really cool to see that rolling out. And I think it will, it's going to be very effective. But to have all of the databases consolidated into one for the modernization, that's really important. To have the ID verification for new entrant carriers, and then eventually all carriers, that's going to make a big difference. And so yeah, real kudos to FMCSA and the teams that have made that happen. There's some really great professionals that are behind that.
And it's a system that at this point has been under development with a lot of input. They've done a number of public outreach opportunities, but to your point, frankly, a key component, a key focus of redoing this is part of the larger effort that the agency is pursuing to combat, I'm going to say freight fraud, but let's just say fraud across the industry, because I think there's probably, rightly so, a number of strong opinions, many of which we would agree with in this room on what needs to happen in that space and on the impact of fraud broadly in cargo and freight.
It's somewhat surreal to think about how prevalent fraud is. It's like, I don't know, pick your Hollywood movie director, like a Quentin Tarantino film that we find ourselves in, with how like surreal the fraud is. In private practice, I saw the evolution from just a case once every few months or whatever to a case every month, and then you're talking about it every week. And I was talking to an attorney that I'd worked with for a few years ago, and he told me they had 150 freight fraud cases, and he's a rec defense person. 5 years ago, they wouldn't have had any. So the increase in fraud is a real issue that's in front of all of everybody. And from the FMCSA's point, or where we sit, the modernization for the registration on that piece of it, which is just one of the pieces in the whole fraud picture, will be very important to combating that, where the bad actors are getting in on that front. But they're getting in, and they're, as you all know, on a lot of fronts. There's a lot of vulnerabilities, and there's a lot of valid reasons why those vulnerabilities exist. And so we do need to find ways to address each of those fronts because it's so widespread. It's such a, and it's a criminal problem. We're sitting here, FMCSA is civil enforcement over safety and a little bit of commercial, and this is criminal. That's why I said it's kind of a Hollywood movie. It's so absurd that we're vulnerable to this, but the resources that are needed to combat it are extensive as well. But there are a lot of things I think the industry is doing right, and the attention. It always seems like it should have been yesterday, but the more and more attention to best practices. But there are a number of things that we absolutely need to be doing to combat fraud. And at the FMCSA, I think one of the big pieces is the ID verification that's being rolled out. So the education seminars, and many of you have probably participated in those, but those be in the future, I think, are critical to that.
So I think, Jesse, you've talked about fair enforcement and a focus that the agency wants to move in that way. You've talked about a number of areas or considerations that are being made specifically and especially to, I'm pointing at Pavan, who's sitting there in the front row, the new ID verification system that's going into place. Is there one message that you would leave this group with as far as what the focus of your job as counsel, what Secretary Duffy and others are going to be driving towards?
I guess there are two, one is that we, and I definitely say it's an amplification. It's not a change in culture or course, but it is a renewed focus on due process. It is a renewed focus on fairness and consistency. But I would just repeat what I said earlier, that Secretary Duffy is interested in our industry, which is a huge win. So I think it's a very exciting time to be at the FMCSA under his leadership, because he's going to do everything he can to make sure that safety is the priority, is the core mission of the FMCSA, but also do a lot of common sense, take a lot of common sense approaches to address some of the challenges that we're facing. And that is, again, I'm not as a qualifier, but it is within, those actions that we'll take will be within our authorities, and they'll be within our limited resources. And so we need to find smart ways to really use the resources that we have, because we do have limited resources, and that's a reality that each of you appreciate. That, but I'll tell you, the resources are top tier from my view where I'm sitting. I've been really impressed with how professional and how smart and how willing the FMCSA is to implement the priorities that have been conveyed from the White House and from Secretary Duffy.
Well, and I think you make a good point, which is from the Secretary's office, we are excited about the team that's being built at FMCSA and across the department wide. And frankly, years and years ago when I used to do the Landline Now program on a more regular basis with OIDA, we would always conclude, or very often conclude those with a call to action, right, to people who were listening to reach out to their lawmakers and convey the topic we talked about or concerns and challenges. So I will paraphrase that and say, we're here. The FMCSA is here. We have a booth that's right by the registration on your way in. Jesse and I will be here by the side of the stage following this conversation. So at the moment, we're happy to hear that, but I'll also try to plug up that, as mentioned, we do have an administrator nominee, a guy who's familiar, Derek, who's familiar to a number of people in this room. If there are issues and concerns, not to get ahead of him and not to get ahead of Secretary Duffy, that we want to see addressed. We hope we can take that message in here and take it in thoroughly, but also hope that as we are working in DC to try to get him confirmed, that if you have thoughts on that, don't hesitate to let your legislators know. We're going to want to make sure we get all the support we can so that President Trump and Secretary Duffy are able to build their teams.
I agree.
Thanks.
I second that.
Yeah. Well, I look forward, Todd, I'm happy to catch up with you after this, sir.
I was just going to ask what actions FMCSA takes right now when you identify what is a bad what actions can you or are you taking now?
Well, when we have the information to make a decision, we revoke that license and that registration. So there are a number of things that we're doing, but catching them and preventing them from getting in the system, I think that's going to be the real win, right? With the rollout of the ID verification. So yeah, we can cancel authorities, but we can refer to criminal agencies, state and federal. And there have been some wins. They're just not, there was one win last week, I think, out of Rochester, New York. I don't know if it, and there was a ring that was caught months ago as well. I mean, law enforcement, the DOJ, Department of Justice, they just don't, there's just so much of it. But they are getting some wins on the criminal front. And I know personally, when I was in private practice, and it did seem to be unfair, the bigger carriers with the direct line to the FBI, who were very vulnerable, they were the ones that could act in real time. Because, I mean, one of the last ones that I was involved in, we were acting in real time. We were involving local law enforcement. They wouldn't even go over to do anything. But, so I can tell you, yeah, from a non-criminal view, the FMCSA can cancel, the authority once they have that evidence, and they do. They take those actions all the time for registration when they find that information out.
From the Department of Transportation, I know y'all are aware our pilots are required to read and speak English. Our truck drivers are required to read and speak English. Can you comment on why the FMCSA is not enforcing the out-of-service violation for truck drivers who cannot read and speak English?
So, I think in the future there will be a lot more attention to this. I will say that we do enforce that regulation. It's enforced today.
I don't.
So that's not an FMCSA though. That's CVSA. That's a state.
And I think you can expect.
I think the partnerships are really critical, and I think this issue is absolutely a live issue and will be addressed in the near future. And so, but I don't think. So yeah, also another live issue. But that doesn't mean, so that's at a state level, but I would say that they're probably not unvetted if I was to correct that premise of your question. I think, no. But so I look forward to having these kind of conversations if I have that opportunity in the future. These are really issues, and they're hot issues. These are issues that that we need direction from the secretary, and we welcome the feedback of the new administrator once he's confirmed. But we definitely appreciate that they're live issues. And
to Jesse's point, not to get ahead of anything that the secretary or hopefully a soon-to-be confirmed administrator actions they may take. This is stuff that is absolutely being, it's not fallen by the wayside. I think, to your point,
no, it's
there's a long list. We know there's a long list. In fact, a version of that was what a former colleague of mine mentioned to me when I walked in the door this morning. We want to be active. We're going to be active. You got to give us a little bit of time to get the pieces in place, understanding it's stuff on a day-to-day basis, but these are issues that are brought to our attention on a daily basis, whether it's from people in this room or otherwise the connectivity we have across the sector. But before we lose track of things, Jesse, thank you.
Yes.
I think there's opportunity to follow up a lot of these discussions here or at the booth after this. We appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you.
Thank you.